Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the show. This is 110 SAS Actual. Today we have a very special treat for you guys. A Sgt Dave Hill, a Ranger, LRRP veteran from Vietnam. His story is it's something out of a Hollywood movie, and it is going to be such a treat for you guys to listen to his story today.
By this time, it's just me. I'm the only survivor. The old saying, don't go to a gunfight with a knife. We were in that situation. They had the guns, and all we had was our knives. We ran over to the ship, and Elder said, get on. And what do you mean, get on? Get on where? And he's anywhere you can, just grab on. About a nanosecond worth of prayer, and then, you get on with it. Tension. This is no game. We're in deep kimchi here. Cups his hand to my ear and said, gooks all around. Whispered again. They moved a couple squads in behind us. We're cut off. Now we can't run. We didn't know how long we could hide. We were going to have to make our stand.
Guys, I want to tell you about a friend here of the channel that helps make all of this happen. It's Badlands Munitions Company. Guys, they're based right here out of the United States in Arizona, manufacturing some of the highest end ammunition on the market today. They have 5.56 ammo, 9mm ammo, 308. Guys, they have match ammo, plinking rounds, self-defense rounds. They even have competitive 9mm ammo that's poly-coated. They've got a wide array of ammunition for every task at hand. With code 110 SAS, you get 10% off all ammo purchases. 10% off with code 110 SAS. If you guys are anything like me, you're tired of supporting foreign ammo manufacturers, just race to the bottom with little quality control. Supporting United States made manufacturing ammunition that's the most American patriotic thing that you could possibly do. I don't want to support South Korea. I don't want to support Czechoslovakian ammo. I want to support the boys right at home who have families to feed here and pay their taxes here. High-end manufacturing ammunition, very high attention to detail and quality control, and you get 10% off. So guys, Badlands Munitions, go check out their website. They've got something for you, I guarantee it, and 10% off. So let's get back to it. So Mr. Hill, while you're one of the most humble men I have ever met, your story is it's absolutely something out of a Hollywood action movie. It's an honor to have you as a guest on the show, and the viewers here, I think, are just in for a real treat. It's a very raw story in some of the darkest times in our nation's days, the most brutal and heaviest losses in the Vietnam War in 1968 while you were there. So, Mr. Hill, I suppose let's start from the beginning. Tell us a little bit about where you're from. What was home for you growing up?
Well, I grew up in a small farming town, not as small as it used to be, a little town called Visalia. And it's located about halfway between Fresno and Bakersfield in the San Joaquin Valley of California. So you're either working in the farming business or in the agriculture support business. And then you got, of course, your normal grocery stores, retail, and all that other stuff. So I was born February 2nd, 1948. Lived there until I went in the Army. Graduated high school in 1965. The whole theme is Sierra Nevada. Our high school was called Mount Whitney High School. And the other high school across town is called Redwood. So it's very much farming, rural area, which, as I said, has now grown quite a bit.
So I don't suppose you were a troublemaker or anything growing up, right?
I had my share of trouble. I was kind of obstinate, hard-headed, and so I had my moments.
But just enough trouble to keep the sheriff off you, right?
Yes, I did.
Great.
I was good enough to do that.
So, Mr. Hill, you were in high school when the war had really just started to kick off. What was your first things hearing about Vietnam?
Probably I was just out of high school. Had a guy I grew up with, good athlete, good guy. He was one of the first over in Vietnam. He was with the 173rd Airborne Brigade. which was the 1st Army unit. You hear a lot about all of our units over there, but the 173rd was there all alone for quite a while. So it was 173rd and the U.S. Marines up north in Da Nang. He came back and went back to college, and he was a good college ball player too. So that's the first. I really didn't know where it was. I was pretty familiar with Asia and the Pacific because always an aficionado of military history. I think the first book I read was Audie Murphy's autobiography, To Hell and Back. And I grew up with Audie Murphy, John Wayne, Randolph Scott, all of whom served, except I don't think John Wayne did, but Randolph Scott, Lee Marvin, Eddie Albert, they all served back in that era. So and I just enjoyed reading it. I'd read extensively in the Pacific War, the European War. My dad had served in the Italian theater, 1943 to 45. My uncle in the Philippines under MacArthur, and then later on my youngest uncle was a platoon leader in Korea, 7th Division.
So you come from a family that's pretty much mostly all served in some sort of armed forces military role.
Yeah, my great uncle Laurie actually was a Canadian. My dad was a naturalized citizen in Canada, from Canada. Uncle Laurie got killed. Great Uncle Laurie got killed in World War I, what they call the Great War, as if there is such a thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was a tradition in our family. They didn't talk much about it, but that was their wars, and this one was mine.
Now, Dave, you mentioned that they didn't really talk much about that. You know, growing up around the silent generation, the greatest generation of our country, who just rarely spoke about the horrors of war and what they actually did overseas. Your family members whom also didn't speak about it as well. Were you interested in just to know about life in war and what it's like to be in combat?
I would catch snippets once in a while. Some of the guys talking about it, over a beer, just casually talking. But it was they didn't dwell on it. Not much was said about it. I had always been interested. I later found out, of course, the reality is not nearly as good as sitting in a movie theater. I think one of the difference, maybe with the great generation, as we call it, is their story, right or wrong or accurately or not, was told. It was told by Jimmy Stewart, Robert Mitchum, John Wayne, Randolph Scott. So it was out there. I think later on, and for many, many years, what went on in Vietnam, or even what went on in Korea, was not much was made of it. It was almost like, well, here's big World War II, and then you got these smaller conflicts. But and I think also too the scale of World War II, it's just beyond anything I saw in Vietnam. I mean, you're just totally a global war. So it was known. We grew up with it. They took it as a matter of course for them to get drafted. My dad was a Canadian citizen when he got drafted. He was working for the U.S. Department of Agriculture as a green card non-citizen now. He got drafted. He was 27 years old, which is pretty old to go into the military. But they needed people. In fact, he told me, don't enlist when they want you. They'll come get you. Believe me. So the deal was for the citizenship for him, though. You're going to go in the Army. You're going to do your time. And, back then they served for the duration. So he went to the Italian theater. He was a cannon cocker. He was an artilleryman. And the deal was, though, we'll make you a U.S. citizen. So how about that? So citizenship was highly valued. And he later served as a fairly high up in the U.S. Department of Agriculture for the next 35 years after the war. So, and my mom's a war bride. He met her in Italy when he was in occupation duty. So both my parents are naturalized, and the citizenship means a lot to him.
Yeah. Wow. So your father put his life on the line and served in combat theater just to become a naturalized U.S. citizen. I feel like it's kind of rare these days to see that kind of sacrifice be made, doing first for your country, and in return, you get a fresh start. And that's it. That's all you expect. It's incredible.
Even like my godparents are from Italy. They and so many others were Ellis Island people. They came through Ellis Island, New York Harbor, to be citizens, and some settled into the Italian community, the Spanish or Portuguese community, never learned English. It was insular. They were surrounded, and they wanted their kids to do so and to prosper. But they were just glad to be here. Some of them come from dirt poor backgrounds, and America's a new opportunity.
So Dave, you enlisted in 1966. Was the Army just the only choice for you, or did you shop around branches and go visit different recruiters and different jobs in the military?
No, the only two for me is either going to be the Army or the Marine Corps. I was gung ho, and I, believe it or not, wanted to be an infantryman and really didn't want to do anything else. Though I'm looking back, I wish I'd have been a helicopter pilot like Captain Taylor. No, it's just like I say, it was predestined for me. I said, well, who brainwashed it? No, I brainwashed myself. But my whole generation did pretty much. Obviously, there's some that resisted the war and didn't go in. That's up to them. But I always felt like I was going to go when that came in. I would have gone into probably during the non-war period as well. It was just, for me, it was kind of a rite of passage.
Yeah. So when you enlisted, you knew there was a war about, you knew it was brewing, but what exactly did you know about Vietnam at that time?
Well, evening news type stuff, but Walter Cronkite, the ABC, CBS, NBC. There was only 3 networks at that point, and it was a what do you call it? A living room war. We could see it, but still didn't mean much. It was pretty out there. The correspondents, most of them did not go deep into the field, didn't go on combat operations, so it didn't know much about it. I did find out right after I went in the Army. I was very clearly informed by the drill instructor that you're too stupid to survive Vietnam. It wasn't, particularly me. It was all 40 of us in his platoon. So
your drill instructor or your drill sergeant told you that?
Yeah, drill sergeant. Yeah, you couldn't possibly survive, young man. You're too stupid.
Little did he know. Professional rocket pod rider.
He was good. He was good for us. We grew up in there.
That's great. So, how was basic training for you?
I reported to Fort Ord, California, near Monterey. I was there 8 weeks. Usual thing for basic military courtesy, weaponry, how to march, how to make a bed, how to polish a floor, all the important stuff. Later on, you find out though that attention to detail carries over. And that's how you always take care of your weapons, take care of your equipment, do stuff that needs to be done because you've been drilled into you that routines have to be followed. You're not bound by them, but that certain basic things have to be done, Clean that weapon, make sure the springs are functioning, make sure your magazine is properly loaded and the spring is working on that. Make sure you have oil on the outside and oil in the proper place on the inside. All that attention to detail starts in basic training, even though maybe 10% of folks that go through basic will be in combat arms. So that kind of attention to detail. And for me and most guys, it's the first job that you can't quit just because you don't like it.
Yeah, I suppose military isn't really a job you can just turn in your 2 weeks on your boss's desk. So you enlisted as an 11 Bravo infantryman, correct?
Yeah, my next duty station was advanced infantry, individual training infantry.
So how was AIT? What were some of the feelings, as you were going through training, as the war just kind of scaled up and just kind of ramping up in violence? What were some of the feelings that was going through your mind?
Well, it was a lot more rigorous. You get there out of base and well, now I'm a soldier, not in their view. And then you realize pretty quickly, no, you're not. You did just exactly what it's called, basic training. We ran everywhere. If we walked, we route stepped. A lot of physical training, and a lot of running, and just constantly, hammering at you to make you tougher. more specific classes on weapons, how to use a radio, how to fire a grenade launcher. It's just advanced along the infantry skills. Later on, you realize, though, that everything we learned there, beyond the basics of soldiering and being an infantryman, had not a lot of relevance to Vietnam and to combat in Vietnam.
Which kind of seems interesting, really, because it's not like the United States was a complete stranger to jungle warfare. The amount of fighting that we did in the Pacific with the Army and especially the Marines, we were in some pretty dense jungles at times. They didn't really just train you in that at all.
Well, they had a Vietnamese village, like a facsimile. They had facsimiles of a tunnel. They talked about tunnel rats, which fortunately I was not small enough ever to do that, didn't have to. But it was basically teach us how to call in artillery, how to read a map, how to navigate, how to operate a radio. But other than that, you're in piney woods of Georgia. It's no resemblance to the terrain in Vietnam. And of course, even the terrain in Vietnam could vary from mountains to jungles to bamboo to rice paddies. And we operate in all 4 or 5 of those terrain types.
Well, there's rice paddies out in Arkansas, but I don't
think
would be quite like Vietnam's.
Yeah, well, in California, a big-time producer of rice. So is Texas.
Yeah.
In fact, while in Vietnam, we came across caches of enemy supplies. We had bags of rice, hands across the sea. It was ostensibly donated to the Vietnamese by Americans and ended up in the Viet Cong hands and North Vietnamese hands. So we grew it, they grew it. We probably did a lot more efficiently. They used water buffaloes. We used John Deeres.
I suppose we were a few years ahead of them in agriculture. So at what point, Dave, in your training, did you know for a fact that you were going to be shipped to Vietnam?
I went to Fort Benning, trained for 12 weeks, scout dog handler school. Probably, I don't know, about 20 or 30 of us out of Fort Gordon. That was our next assignment was Scout Dog Handler School. So went to Benning, I trained it's a 12-week course, starting with a week of basic obedience. We had German Shepherds, all of them secured by the United States Air Force. And a lot of them came from Europe and Germany. It was a dual branch school too. The United States Marines, their scout dog handlers, also trained separately, but in Fort Benning, Georgia, as well. So that was a bit more realistic because we lived in half shelter, shared little tents essentially, and lived on sea rations during the week, and then we could come back in to the barracks on the weekends. Unless we got stuck on guard duty or maintenance out in the field. So it got a taste of Vietnam in effect, because our handler trainers were themselves scout dog handlers in Vietnam for the most part. So they knew what to teach us, knew what to train us on. But there again, you're going through fake tripwires, fake booby traps, fake ambushes, just to train you and the dog. And most of the guys, when they went to Vietnam as dog handlers, they took over from some other dog handler that hopefully was coming home okay, and now that dog needed a new handler. I was fortunate. Rex, I picked him up right off the bat in Fort Benning, trained him, and he was there waiting for me when I arrived in country. We went over as what they call a packet. We were replacing supposedly originally 173rd Airborne Brigade. It turns out though we got to Vietnam, and you're at the behest of the Department of the Army where they're going to ship you. We ended up with the 1st Infantry Division.
How did it come about that you were going to be a dog handler? I feel like back in those days it couldn't have been a very common job like you see today. You see a lot of military dog handlers, but back then it didn't seem a very common thing.
It was assignment. We were all infantry, 11 Bravos, 11 Charlies, which is bordermen. So that was the basic skill they were looking for. Everything else beyond that is almost like an industrial job, a train-the-trainer type job. So they trained us as at the same time we're simultaneously training our scout dog.
So you first landed in Vietnam in 1967. Dave, tell me what it was like just to land in a country that you knew you were going to war. What were some of your emotions going through you?
We were excited at it. We had trained for it. We didn't. We were too stupid to know how little we actually knew. But we were kids, and so went over. Fortunately, I was not an individual replacement. I went over with guys I trained with at Fort Benning. We didn't. We broke up when we got to Vietnam, and some went to the 1st, some went to the 25th Infantry, some went to 101st, 173rd Air. Most of the guys in our group went to 173rd Airborne, but the Army shuttled you where they needed you. And our unit that we went to, 41st Infantry Platoon, Scout Dogs, was just at their turnover point. A lot of their guys were going home, so they needed a number of replacements, and we were it.
When you first arrived there, what was that feeling like arriving in Vietnam?
Well, it was a long trip. Ours, we stopped at Wake Island on the way over there, which, of course, had been a big battle, U.S. Marine Corps in the Pacific in World War II. But it's it's like midway. It's kind of halfway, to Asia proper, I'll call it. And we flew from there on into, I believe that was the only stop we made on the way in. It might have stopped at Guam. But at any rate, we ended up flying into Ben Hoa Air Force Base, which is northeast of Saigon. And right next to Ben Hoa Air Base, which is one of the busiest airports in the world at that time. They had everything from transport aircraft to commercial airliners, which we flew to war on Continental Airlines, 707s. And they also had fighter bombers, helicopters, everywhere you could look. We arrived about 2 o'clock in the morning. They opened the airliner door, and you get hit by this horrible smell and heat and humidity. I grew up in a very dry climate where we get about 10 inches of rainfall a year in Central California. I trained in Georgia, which is very humid. However, I was done with training in Georgia in May, so I kind of beat the heat, so to speak. So it was a shocker to me. I'd never been in that kind of humidity.
What was the stench that you said?
Well, I later found out they were burning crap. That's the sanitation over there. You have a 55-gallon drum is slipped under a 2 or 4-hole latrine, and that's pulled back out, and you throw diesel on it as a base igniter, and then they throw some gasoline on that and throw a match in it and let it burn up, and it over time, and then you dump it someplace, but it kind of supposedly sanitize it. I have no idea, but it was a duty that all of us enlistment had at one time or another. You may recall from the movie Patton when he said, when your grandkids ask you, what you did in the Great World War II, I shoveled shit in Louisiana. So you don't have to say that. At any rate, that was it. But it permeated the air and the heat and humidity. And it's 2 o'clock in the morning, and you've been traveling 18 hours. And they took us to 90th Replacement Battalion, which was an adjacent base camp, a big base camp called Long Bin. Took us on buses, and which was a weird experience. You get on the bus, you got your duffel bag, and that's it. That's your world. Well, all the bus windows had chicken wire screens over them. So, I asked one of the guys that was on the second tour I happened to be sitting next to. He said, that's to keep them from throwing grenades in there. I said, so we're here in this city, and we got to worry about somebody throwing grenades in. He said, yeah, could happen anywhere.
Did you have?
I think he was messing with me a little bit too, but that was the purpose of the screen.
Did you have your service weapon on you at that time?
No, we had nothing on
us. Whew. Rolling around in a bus in Vietnam with chicken wire all over the windows, and you didn't even have a weapon to protect yourself. I guess that seems pretty wild.
Yeah, it was, and but The last thing they needed was a lot of people that didn't know how to handling weapons. So it wasn't a good point to introduce us. We would pick those up when we went to our actual unit. And once we got to 93 Placement Battalion, that had security and bunkers and all that stuff. But it was definitely, compared to where I later served, it was a rear echelon area.
So July 1967, that's when you actually got into Vietnam. Who were you first assigned to, Mr. Hill?
Originally 173rd Airborne. When I got to one and we had trained as a unit at Fort Benning. It's called a packet because the dogs, they invested more money in them than they did in us probably. At any rate, we get to 90th replacement. Well, now you're subject always to the need of the Army, and the Army said no. Okay, you came over as 30 guys, 25 guys. 5 are going to the 25th Infantry Division. 5 are going to go to the 1st Infantry Division. 1st Division had 2 Scout Dog platoons, one north and one south. I went to the northern one in a place called Phuc Vinh, and that was the 41st Infantry Platoon, Scout Dogs, and we were part of the 1st Brigade, the 1st Infantry Division.
So you'd made it to your line company with Rex, your scout dog. What exactly was your mission with Rex as a dog handler?
Yeah, the primary purpose of the Scout Dog team you had various type of canine units in the military. You got sentry dogs, which are used to guard fixed bases, which are primarily Air Force and Army and Marines and Navy have them as well. But they're guarding fixed bases like an artillery base or an airport or air base. You have tracker dogs, which are just like any hound dog, and they're made to track right to, take a scent and track it to the enemy in that case, which I never liked that concept at all. Scout dog is trained to what we call alert. We walk in point. The 1st Division, when I first got there, they have what they call a combat indoctrination school. And before guys even go to line infantry, they go through their 4 or 5 days, get acclimated, get some basic instructions before they're sent out to their unit. We worked with that CIC, we called it, to also break in our dog handlers, like those of us who were brand new guys. So I did that, and then we started going to the field.
Now, Dave, was it hard showing up to your new unit as this new guy, replacement? Did you get that kind of typical FNG, cherry, green soldier treatment from the more senior and more experienced guys?
We did, yeah. And later on, I understood it. At the time, I said, hey, we're in the same team. No, you're not on my team yet. You haven't proven yourself. So the vets, in a way, it was great because that's their future. They don't get to go home if they don't get a replacement. And we replaced their buddies who they'd gone over there with and served for a year with. Their turn would be coming up. Until then, till we knew what we were doing, we were a liability, potentially, not an asset. But they also were the guys that helped train us because they'd done it for a year. Our basic job was to walk as part of the point element. Normally we had a slack man behind us to cover us because we're focused on our dog. What we're watching for is we're walking along. We got him in a harness, and once we put the harness on, as opposed to a choke chain for training, and we'd say, okay, scout, and that's his trigger, and now he's a working dog. No different, than a Labrador retriever or a Springer where you're going after pheasant. He knows, okay, playtime's over. This is the job. So we would walk in front, have a guy behind it to help protect us. We were armed, but our main responsibility was that dog. And if he comes to a tripwire, he's trained to stop. And he'd sit. We know, okay, let's get down here and see what's going on. Usually the guy behind me would come up and check out and see what the dog's alerting on. If he alerted on people, he literally, the way Rex's was, his ears would just come up like that. You could lay a rifle between his ears and he's looking right at where either saw something, he heard something, or he smelled something. And when that happens, you don't do anything except get on the ground behind him, and you pulled him down as well. So he's to give you early alert. His primary job is anti-ambush.
Would you say that Rex was overall successful and he just genuinely helped with your missions?
Yeah, for the role we were in, traveling with a bunch of infantry, line infantry, which make a lot of noise. They have aircraft usually somewhere in our vicinity. There's no question that there's Americans in the area. And I never talk down the infantry. It's a tough, dirty, lousy job, and a dangerous one. But it's totally different than being an alert, and we blend the two together, Lrrp Rangers. So they had plenty of organic firepower. But as I later felt, I never felt safety in numbers. If the NVA wanted to hit a platoon, they hit you with a company. If they wanted to hit your company, they hit you with a battalion. And battalion, they hit with a regiment. Most gunfights, the Americans were outnumbered. It seemed like we had a big army. By the time I left, 545,000 men. Less than 10% are combat arms. Even less of those are infantry. So you made up for it. Hopefully you made up for it with tactics and with firepower. Not just what you carried, but your air and artillery support.
Yeah, I can imagine having the firepower of the U.S. military-industrial complex at your disposal, only a phone call away. I can imagine that's a pretty nice security blanket. So, prior to your first real gunfight, what did you heard about the NVA and the Viet Cong?
The Viet Cong were smaller units. A lot of them, instead of carrying an AK-47 or AKM, any of those, they generally often would be carrying an M1 or M2 carbine, Korean War vintage, World War II vintage even, or SKS semi-automatic rifles, 7.62 by 39. And of course, a lot of them did carry AK-47s. By the time I got there, I guess you could call it almost kind of the midpoint of the war, getting there in '67. So the NVA would stick and fight. The Viet Cong, if they could, would maybe what we call DD. They would go, leave the area. They were all pros though. Just different levels of armament and communications sophistication. The NVA were more conventional than the Viet Cong. Both of them were less conventional than the American Army compared to line infantry. NVA are just, I guess just a higher level of training. Eventually there became many more of them. The Viet Cong pretty much were wiped out during Tet of '68 in places like Hue, Saigon, Ban Me Tuot. Any city areas, they sacrificed their Viet Cong. They were the guys that could infiltrate in there, and they're the guys that didn't get away after Tet. And so later on, it was pretty much NVA, but they were guided around villages by Viet Cong scouts.
Now, was there ever any immediate kind of tall tale signs that said, hey, this is NVA we're dealing with, or hey, this is Viet Cong that's hitting us?
I never noticed a distinction. It just, their bullets are coming the wrong way towards us. It was the enemy. It was just a matter, the fight might go on, I generally would go on longer with NVA versus, say, Viet Cong, but they could all fight well, particularly from if they were in defilade and we were out in the open, well, they got the advantage any way you look at it. So the bigger battles were generally NVA. They had moved in our area, had moved in from the Cambodian border, probably heading towards Saigon, Long Binh, Bien Hoa, and up north, places like Hue and Phu Bai, the built-up areas. So, yeah, there was no distinction. It's the same 7.62 by 39 coming at you.
It's neither.
And the
neither
weird
makes
part was
sense.
they had green tracers
Oh, really?
as opposed to our orange or red.
Tell me about the first time you made contact with the enemy and those bullets started flying the wrong direction.
Well, it happened suddenly, obviously. We were on the ground by that point. Rex had alerted and had a little bit had tree between us and the shooting. They brought the M60 machine gun up. They deployed them forward, and the infantry came up on line as much as they could. Depending on the terrain, that happened to be in a pretty heavily jungled area. So you can't see much. It's like being here in the States, being in a thicket. It's like the Battle of the Wilderness back in Virginia in the Civil War. And then they proceeded to call in artillery, and we didn't lose anybody in that encounter, fortunately. But they had triggered the ambush a little early, in my view, looking back on it. Though I got no objection to that. And so that was it. It just said, oh, okay, so that's what that's all about. So,
What were you thinking during that first snap? You know, what was the emotions that overcame you?
well, I was reacting. Everybody around me was reacting. There wasn't, you didn't have to think much. It didn't require a lot of deep thought. They're there, we're here, and let's get them first. Let's get some support. But that fight was over pretty much almost as fast as it started. And perhaps that's an indication. Perhaps they might have been Viet Cong. But at any rate, once they surprised the loss, well, their advantage went with it, and pretty quickly we have a lot of firepower we can bring in on them, and we did. The results, never saw any results. I don't know if anybody on their side. I know we didn't take any casualties, but I don't know what happened on their side.
Well, I'm glad you guys didn't take any hits that day. Now, you spent a few months in a line company before you actually became a LRRP. How did the opportunity come about to become this elite unit?
Yeah, well, I'd been doing it. I was perhaps the most senior guy in the platoon. I was a squad leader, which wasn't the same as being a squad leader in the line infantry unit, but I had administrative authority over other dog handlers, 3 or 4 of them. So we go out. Usually we deploy with 2 teams, a handler and his dog, together to support an infantry battalion or infantry company. We would run our missions in line as either platoons or company level. Sometimes we have what they call a battalion minus, which would be 2 companies. So you're talking about 250 Americans, maybe 300, though they were always under strength. So we would go out and do that, and that's what I did routinely for that first 6 months. The Army came up with an idea, and as such, it was not field tested, so they wanted somebody to field test it. They thought that, well, the Lrrps are out there by themselves, the Rangers. Wouldn't it be great if we could help them not walk into an ambush? What they didn't know that primary thing, number one, there is some luck involved, but also that's due to stealth, and that's due, if possible, to stay one step ahead of enemies out there trying to get you as well, if he knows you're there. Well, the scout dog, that wasn't a consideration, and his noise wasn't a consideration of the dog itself, because he was far less noisy than the infantry that surrounded him, that he was supporting, but also were protecting he and me, Rex and myself. So they wanted to try that. So the CO asked me, and he said, well, they got this group they're called Lrrps, and they operate with small teams. That's what he said, and he had been through Ranger School, and that was all he knew about it. And he said they wanted to try one of our scout teams, so I can give you first shot at it. I said, okay, I don't really know what I'm taking first shot at, but I don't like what I'm doing. It just might be something different, you know. I'll give it a whirl. So he just told me it's a small unit, going to see if the scout team will work. So that was in our base camp in Quan Loy, which is up in the rubber, not far from the vast Michelin rubber plantations in that part of Vietnam. It's a three-corps area. Quan Loy was about 5 or 6 miles, I believe, just to the east of the Vietnam-Cambodian border. So it was a hot area up there, a lot of rubber trees, a lot of bamboo. And Lai Kay was a little south of us by about, I think 40 or 50 kilometers down what they call National Highway 13. The nickname was Thunder Road. Because at the time there was an old bootlegger movie with Robert Mitchum, and it was Thunder Road. So they named it, as GIs often do. And said, you're going down to Lai Kay. Went down there. My team was out on a mission, Team Wildcat 2. That was our radio call sign. We always kept that designation. Perhaps not good operational security, but any aircraft heard a Wildcat station calling, they knew we were 4 or 5 guys in deep trouble and we needed help 10 minutes ago. So it was helpful in that regard. That's how Captain Larry Taylor knew who we were later on. So at any rate, we tried it. There's a couple of small villages outside of the base camp of Lai Kay, and we did some overnight mission. Rex was fine, a little noisy, and they were night. About 2 weeks later, and I'm learning from the Lrrps too. My job was just what it was in the infantry. I'm walking point with the scout dog. I got my Car 15, kind of a short version, carbine version of an M16, and it's dog leash in the left hand, controlling Rex, and then carrying my rifle in the right hand, just almost like a pistol outside of the holster, just so I can react. But that was the other disadvantage. When you got a small team, you need everybody's firepower. If one guy's out, well, you're down 20%. If one guy gets hit, you're down 40% because you got somebody else taking care of him. So that was the other element. I could not fully participate in the fight because I'm also managing Rex. And he was good, and he wasn't gun shy. He didn't react badly to firearms, even bullets coming over top of us. But he was just too noisy. He was a hard charger. He huffed and puffed. You could hear him, which didn't bother us at all in the infantry. Didn't work. We were outside of a village area called Phu Loy. It was a major base camp. We were out there in the rice paddies in ambush. One of the guys accidentally stepped on Rex's tail. He let out a huge yelp. And it's almost like you want to just shrink into the mud. So, oh, Jesus, crimey, it's noisy. After that, team leader, Ron Luce, was our first team leader, Sergeant Ron Luce. He would, talk to first sergeant, talk to CO, Captain Price. And he says, well, the dog team's not going to work, but I want to keep Hill. He's doing fine. He's got experience. I can train him to do our tactics as opposed to what he's learned the first 6 months. So Rex is essentially, except for short training patrols around like a base camp, he got an R&R for the next 6 months while I finished my tour. Once we started running missions as a Lrrp, I started them, said this is the way to fight the war. We're very quiet. We never surprised anybody in line infantry. They knew we were coming. And if they didn't initially, they certainly would by the time we got within a half mile of them. At any rate, like I said, there was no safety in numbers. If they're going to hit you, they're going to hit you. And with big firepower, depending on what size your unit is. So with Lrrps, it's stealthy. We generally initiated the vast majority of our contacts. Other cases, we were compromised, we had to run. So it was just a different mode. So the dog wasn't going to work. So I just became part of Wildcat 2. I was primary job was either a grenadier. Normally we'd have 3 or 4 riflemen, depending on the size of the overall team, and an M79 grenadier. And so I learned to use that a lot better than I ever had in training, obviously. And the rest of the time I was on rear security. A rear security job is covering our back trail defensively as we're moving, but also moving brush back into place. It's just like, if you do it right, then an Apache Indian couldn't track you. But in some case, like in Rice Paddy, where we were often, well, you can't cover those tracks. You know, they're part of it. Eventually rain will wipe it out, or they'll flood it as part of the irrigation process. So that was our job of rear security. We conducted drills all the time, what we call IA drills, immediate action. It was a system developed in Malaya by the Australian Special Air Service, and we run like, if you got contact front, it's called an Australian peel. And contact front, right, left, rear, you have a reaction. If point man runs into it, he fires magazine, peels off. Next guy in line fires magazine, peels off. Next guy, so on, till you get back to me as rear. Now all of a sudden I'm rear again, and I fire my magazine, and we take off. So you can't think about it. It has to be immediate reaction. The team leader might decide it's better just to charge on through this ambush that we've managed to walk into to get to the other side, out of the kill zone. So the team leader calls the shot, or he does nothing because he knows you've been trained to do and react in certain ways. But it's always automatic, and nothing's automatic any more than being a football player. You do the drills, you make the effort ahead of time, so when you need it, you don't have to think about it.
Wow. So seems like a tremendous difference in just operational SOPs and just missions in general. What were some of like the mission essential items and kit that you absolutely had to have on you, or you said that, hey, I need this as a LRRP?
Yeah, we, depending on the length of the mission, we determine how much water, how many dehydrated, what they call LRRP rations, that we could carry with us. You know, you have a rope for a Swiss seat in case you may need to be extracted. We trained also on how to ride in a McGuire rig, which is basically a kid's swing in a park, an old canvas thing that you just sit in, suspended, three of them suspended under a helicopter. So we were trained in it, but fortunately I never had to use that. We also trained often in rappelling. We had a big tree that had about a 70-foot drop on it, and we could climb the ladder up there and rappel out of there, just in case we had to rappel in, rather than you know, actually being inserted on the ground from the helicopter. So we would plan our mission and supply ourselves accordingly. Back then, our magazines, we carried a Car 15, which as opposed to the current M4 modern sporting rifle, it's generally like a 16-inch barrel. This is 12.9 inch, but it had it was the first telescoping stock I'd ever seen. So you could carry it pretty much like a submachine gun style, like say a Thompson is about the same size, or you extend it out, and it was a good, accurate shooting weapon. As far as I was concerned, every bit as good as the M16. Generally, we carry 400 to 500 rounds of ammunition. The rucks might be heavy or light. We carried as much as we could on our load-bearing equipment. Often we're using empty Claymore bags to carry extra magazines, or we carry 4 or 5 of the 5.56 magazines in an empty canteen cover, canvas cover, on our load-bearing gear. We carried a lot of essentials on the LBE because if we needed to, if we were being chased, we could dump the rucksack and not sacrifice our ability to defend ourselves.
So as a LRRP, you had a pretty wide array of firearms at your guys' disposal, and you had the liberty to essentially take out whatever gun you wanted. Now, you had mentioned off camera that you used a CAR-15 quite a bit, and an M2 carbine as well. Did you ever use the M16A1? I'd like to hear some of your thoughts on just some of the small arms you carried on missions.
Well, I never did carry an M16. I carried a CAR-15. We were lucky. Us and the Lrrps Special Forces were probably the first people to carry the CAR-15. It was a great weapon. It was the first M16 A1s. I believe it was A1, yeah. They were great, for coming apart, as the Marine Corps would tell you. They had some terrible experience with them early on. Failure to eject. Literally, even in my CAR-15, I carried a cleaning rod taped underneath the foregrip, so I'd get access to it. So they would feed, but sometimes they would fail to extract. Didn't happen to me. And they chromed the chambers. They went to better ammunition instead of the terrible, messy stuff that Eugene Stoner never envisioned being fired out of his rifle. So, but that was earlier. They had it pretty fixed up. They had the second generation of M16s were issued to the troops. A lot of our guys had them because there were not CAR-15s for everybody. But I brought mine along because I was a scout dog handler, and that was a basic issue for dog handlers. So it was a fine weapon, and I think probably not as accurate as an M16 beyond 200 meters, but it was pretty much the same at that point. Very lightweight. Our magazines were suspect. They were 20-round magazines. This is before they eventually came out with 30-rounders. Some guys were buying 30-rounders, sending home, and their parents or buddies were buying them from sporting goods stores, but the Army was not yet issuing them. They were to Special Forces, the guys in MAC-SOG that really, really needed a lot of firepower, and they were all totally on their own. They didn't even get support until they were already in deep trouble. So they might have one or two of those. So we had 20-round magazines. We'd load them to 18 rounds because we were cautioned that anything beyond that, the springs were weak. You constantly emptied them out when I got back, cleaned them up, and mine worked fine. I didn't have a problem, but I took care of it. You left them empty until you loaded for combat for an operation because you didn't want to put any more pressure on that spring than necessary. So I shot 16 a few times, but I liked the CAR. But it was a very good, reliable weapon, high rate of fire, but we very seldom use spray and pray. Our ammunition is all we're going to get, because if they could give us an ammo resupply, they could extract us, is the way we looked at it. And so we carried a lot of ammo. Very accurate, though, too, and no recoil. So it had a lot going for it. It was a good weapon of war. And I guess modern variants that are now carried are even much better. So they were made by a lot of different people. Colt started it, and I think other people bought, license and did manufacturing. The real name for it was a XM177 Colt Commando. Okay. We just called it a CAR-15. It's just one of those things that caught on, like calling a transport helicopter a slick, because it only had 2 machine guns on it instead of like a gunship.
Did you ever get the chance to take an M60 out?
No. Unless we had a heavy team, we didn't use any crew serve weapons at all. It was just more weight. Been nice to have the firepower at times, but it was more weight than we needed. Even with say a starter of 100,000 rounds, that's still a lot of weight.
Yeah, I could only imagine humping around another 20-pound weapon with another 60 pounds of ammo would be a little bit of a liability when it comes to stealth and speed, that are so crucial to being a Lrrp. So tell me about that M2 carbine you use. I feel like it's a very interesting choice.
M2 is a great weapon. Obviously, it's proven during the Korean War. It was the full automatic had a selector switch. So it was the M1 carbine of World War I vintage. During the Korean era, they upgraded to full automatic capability. It had 15 to 30 round magazines, very lightweight, quite adequate knockdown power, if you will, for lack of a better term. Obviously, it was 30 caliber rounds, so a little bigger diameter, but it was probably only moving out not a lot faster than a pistol caliber. Probably 1800 feet per second. I can't remember exactly. I didn't carry it often. But when I first got to the unit, my team leader, or assistant team leader, carried AK-47. My team leader carried an M2 carbine. And I, hadn't seen those before because I had come out of the line, and we carried cars. As a officer might have a car 15, but most people carried an M16. So I do recall from the infantry, though, coming over a AK-47, which had been in the mud in a rice paddy. It was run over by an American track, which I don't know, probably weighed 20,000 pounds or more at least, on what we call an armored cavalry vehicle. It was pulled out of the mud. Somebody discovered it in the tank tracks, pulled it up, cranked around, cycled around into it, and it fired immediately. I don't know if the plastic stock of the 16 wouldn't have survived anyways. It's an old wooden stock, AK-47, and very reliable.
Did you ever carry one?
No, I never did. I shot it at the range, but and kind of fun to shoot.
Mm-hmm.
Particularly, it had 30 round banana clips on it, so you could just rip off the whole magazine's worth. But no, it wasn't standard issue. Often units like in Mag Sog that were going across the fence, as we called it, they wanted to carry enemy weapons. One of the reasons I like the M2 carbine in some of the missions were if we're going to be around more villagers, more South Vietnamese soldiers, perhaps local Viet Cong. Often they carried M1 or M2 carbines themselves. Very distinctive sound of an M16 or an M60 compared to an AK-47 or a carbine. I carried the carbine when like in a later situation, we knew we were going to be around villagers or ARVNs, Army of Vietnam, South Vietnamese. Did not want a weapon tipping us off that we were Americans. So that's the main reason I carried on a couple missions. Generally, I carried the car or I carried the M79 grenade launcher, stump gun.
You mentioned sound signature of the weapons being very distinct and just very distinguishable to that exact platform. Did your LRRP team leader ever say why he carried that AK?
That was probably part of it, the sound, but also the reliability, and not unimportant. It had a 30 round magazine.
That would definitely make sense. I spoke with and I've read quite a few Vietnam veteran firsthand accounts about the M16 and those 20 round mags you guys had to run. And universally, everyone just seems to agree that having an extra, 10 rounds at your disposal, it couldn't hurt.
Absolutely. I mean, in World War II, the M1 Garand, it's 8 rounds. But then when that final round's gone, you hear a ping as it comes popping out of the weapon as well. And then you got very quick at putting another 8 rounds in there out of a clip. That's another distinction here. People talk about clips and magazines, and usually a reporter talks about a clip when he's really talking about a magazine. Big difference. One's a loading device, the other one's a carrying and feeding device. So, at any rate, 18 rounds, yeah, and it's gone. You can reload in a couple seconds. Some of the situations in modern day, unfortunately, they talk about, well, you got to extended magazine, oversized magazine. Well, 30 round magazine is standard. It's not high volume. It's only high volume to a television reporter. But Our basic weapons are good. 79 was great. It had both flechette rounds, which like a big, oversized shotgun, 12 gauge, because they were 40 millimeters. And but generally I carried HE rounds. And the 79, it was once you got used to it, and we never used the sights. The sights were on there, but we never brought them up for elevation or any fine shooting. We weren't shooting through, a window in an urban situation and stuff. You shot it by feel, and you could walk them in. You could shoot high, and while that's in the air, you got another round in there. You're shooting low, and pretty soon you got movement, just like an artillery being adjusted. Mm-hmm. And they ranged out to 350 or 400 meters, which is beyond what we normally had. But the other thing about it, you could be in rear security with a 79, and you can shoot over top of your folks or way over all of our heads without any danger of hitting the guys in front of you.
I could definitely see the M79 would be a great tool at your disposal in gaining just a touch more fire superiority, especially if it's just 4 or 5 of you guys out there. So Dave, tell me about your first real firefight operating as a LRRP.
We were the ambushers. We were sitting in an ambush overwatch site on a trail. Had a small group, and there's a bit of guesswork involved. Is that small group, are they scouts, recon people like us, or are they point element of a company or a battalion, much bigger unit? So it's up to the team leaders, and it's almost like mine seemed to have a real good sixth sense. That particular one, they were a small group like us. We hit them. We had claymores set up. Start the fight with the detonated claymores when we think they're in their kill zone there. We're far enough back from the trail to be concealed, but we're close enough to have a pretty good idea of when they're in our kill zone.
How far would you say they were?
30 meters.
It's close.
Yeah. But it was night. It was a night ambush. Blow the claymores, and then we fire up with our small arms, our rifles in this case. Grenades, if the engagement goes on for a little while longer. Then we go out, check backpacks, grab weapons, see if we got anything on their person for intel. But we didn't spend a lot of time there. When I've heard people, and I think it's pure braggadocio, talk about taking the ear, I say, if you got time to sit there and saw somebody's ear off, number one, that's grizzle. That's not, it's practically like bone. Why you would want to do that to another person, I have no idea. Some people, I think most of the people that brag about doing that didn't do it. They weren't even in that situation to do it. So you got out there, you checked out bodies, and then you DD'd. DD is, Pidgin Vietnamese for move out. Because once our shooting stopped, didn't mean people knew we were there. And since we normally carried American weapons, they knew the difference in sound. And we didn't want to be there when the reactionary force came. Let me tell you a little bit about how our missions started.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, we generally, when we've been a platoon, we were part of D Troop Air, part of the Armored Cavalry. We were the reconnaissance part of the division, 1st Infantry Division, known as the Big Red One, from the nature of its patch. We would get a warning order. Our CO would get fragged. He'd get a mission assignment from G2, which is Division Intelligence. We went up to LIK, all of a sudden we were company size, and we worked directly for Intel. Not as part of our chain of command, but they're the ones that tasked us what they wanted us to do, where they wanted us to look. They would give us what we call a recon zone. And that normally for us could be 25 square kilometers, just a box, we call a recon box, that might be 25 square kilometers, five on the side. and we would get that mission area, and then we get our mission assignment. And usually it was what we called a area recon. So we knew we were going. Our team leader or the assistant team leader, both, would do what we call an overflight. Go out with a Huey or a scout ship, depending on what was available, and not fly right over the area of operation, but at least adjacent to it, so we could see what's going on. So number one, we could look for LZs, where that helicopter is going to land. So that was shaped out. We'd find out what air and artillery assets were available to us. Sometimes we operated within the artillery fan, and most of the time, or a lot of the time, we were outside of that. The 105s were pretty accurate, but they were fired a lot, and those tubes and the rifling in those tubes would get worn out, so you could end up with long rounds, short rounds. We tried never to be on the when we were calling them, tried to be on what we called the Golf Tango line, the gun target line. We didn't want to be between us and what we were trying to hit with the artillery, because they seldom had deviations in terms of windage, right or left of the target. So we lay on that. We'd have our radio call signs. We know what air assets, like in this case D Troop, their call sign. When we knew them, the gun support was Mustang. Later on, the whole troop became what we call Dark Horse. So you get on the mission, you know pretty much who's going to be there. We take support from anybody. Much of the support came from a countrywide group called the 1st Aviation Brigade, and they supported divisions, they supported corps areas, and they were just there. So that, and we had our Tactical Operations Center in Light K we called a Wildcat Zulu, and that was the talk. They had the powerful radios, and that's who would be in contact if possible. But if we were too far out, our Prick 25 radio, which is would be considered very old technology now, did not have a great range on it. We had an extended antenna, which should get us a little more. But if we were far enough out, we used what we call an FOB, forward operating base, and that was a radio relay team. So we communicate with them. So we knew their call signs, our call signs, and anybody that would likely be operating the area, particularly air assets. And then we'd load up. Team leader might decide. You might have your own discretion on what weapon you're going to be carrying, and it may depend on which part of the team you're on, what your position was. Like mine often was rear security. So, and once we got all that information and we know when we're going to go and where we're going to go, and we're loaded for bear, and then we go looking for trouble. And hopefully we found it first. Didn't always work out that way.
I could only imagine causing trouble would be a whole lot better than the trouble finding you. So if you look back at the actual reports and the after action reports, you guys were responsible for inflicting some rather serious losses to the enemy. Tell me about the first time, Dave, that you squeezed the trigger and a person on the other end of your iron sights fell over.
That was practically our first mission. They were, you're not always sure who hit them, because you often, particularly if it's a small group, you're firing all of you into the same area. And at nighttime, often you're firing at their muzzle flashes and they're firing at yours. We generally did not, I virtually never carried tracers. The crew-served weapons is every 5th round was a tracer. But tracer work both ways. If you're just shooting at a flash in the night, that's one thing. And if you're shooting at something that's got a red stream emanating from it, it's a whole different thing. I carried one magazine that was pure tracer, and that was just for marking a target if we got an aircraft overhead and I want to direct some fire. But generally, we didn't use tracers. So, but good shot. We practiced a lot. We were a good marksman. We could shoot quickly. You didn't have a chance to do a lot of real fine aiming, particularly at night. But when you're got up a target, a person, we tried to think of him more as a target. At any rate, yeah, didn't think much of it. It's just it was there. I mean, it was us or them, and in that case, fortunately, we won because we survived it. They didn't. I'm sure they looked at it the same manner as we did, just from the other side of the gun, other side of the stock of that weapon, their weapon versus ours. So you just did it. I don't know if it ever became routine, but it's just something that's part of the job.
You know, one thing I've always found very interesting about just the entire war in Vietnam is that it was unlike really any other war prior. Vietnam, for lack of better wisdom, it was more of a numbers game. It wasn't measured in ground taken, but more so a number of enemies, casualties that you had inflicted, if you will. Were you and your team like tasked with reporting those numbers of enemy KIA you inflicted? Like, how many enemy KIA would you say that your team actually did inflict?
I really wouldn't know. I can tell you one probably more specifically. We were on a mission. We had what we call a double team. We call them a heavy team, or some people call them, some of the Lrrp units call a hunter-killer team. And instead of being 5 guys or 6 guys, which is the normal team size, we had 10 or 12 guys. And in those missions, we did carry an M60 machine gun and had an assistant gunner supporting that machine gun team, or comprising the team. So we had gone out in 31st of January 1968, Tet 68, which most people have heard about. It was a general offensive. Instead of being us trying to find them, beat the brush for them, whether line infantry or running missions as a Lrrp or ranger, they came out in the open. And our team in January, before I got there, the first night at Tet, they spotted an enemy battalion moving towards Phu Loi Base Camp, which is Division Artillery Headquarters, also the home of our air troop, D Troop Air, 1st Squadron, 4th Cavalry. The team was out there, they spotted movement, they took them in their ambush, and then they called it in and alerted the base camp, you guys are going to get hit. And they did. Then they occupied a little village called On Me. On the night of 11 May 1968, I'd been on the team for 3 or 4 months. We were on a heavy team operation, 2 teams. Wildcat 2 was our team leader Ron Luce, assistant team leader Bob Elsner. I was rear security on that team as well, carrying M79 that night. We had gone out 2 nights previously and had seen enemy trying to go into a village which is about 3 kilometers outside the main base camp. The enemy didn't expect us to be out there because American infantry doesn't get that far away normally, for the most part, from whatever their night position is. So we caught them unawares. They were going to get past us, so we opened up a long distance. No known result. They fired at and headed, and they got into the village. 2 nights later, Team 1 and 2, and it was kind of a dual leadership. So it was Jackie Leisure was the TL for Team 2, Team 1. Luce was Team 2, our team leader. We set up almost in the same place. Again, the enemy doesn't expect you to do that. Americans, by doctrine, don't go to the same point. That's why we did it. So we're out there, and an enemy is an old ancient graveyard, and it's got these little for lack of a better term, little pagoda-like cement structures, and those are the grave markers, and family size, almost like little mausoleums. We set up in there, gave us good defensive cover because of that concrete we were amongst. We set up there, and we had what was fairly new to us, but really old technology, night vision technology, called a starlight scope. And starlight scope takes ambient light, stars, moon, artillery illumination if it's far enough out away. Looking through the scope, we took turns watching the area where we thought they might cross, the same place that they had crossed in Tet of 68. Little town, a village called Tonfukan. We refer to it as dog leg because when the aviators flew over it, it was L-shaped, like a dog leg on a golf course. So they were moving from a dog leg village over to the village of On Me. So they had about 400 or 500 meters of totally open rice paddy to cover. I was looking through the scope, and I could faintly see some movement into the tree line or brush line, probably 300 or 400 meters away, quite a ways from us. I get probably about 8 feet above the ground level, which is huge when you got an open terrain in front of you. I could just barely see some movement in the wood line, about 300 meters from us. They were moving from on our right side, heading northwest, and they came to a trail junction. And about that time, I handed my team leader, "Hey, Ronnie, got movement," and so he got on the scope there. Well, they were going to the same exact trail crossing, and basically it's a wide pathway used for water buffalo carts and stuff between Dogleg and the village of On Me. As I say, it's the same path they had been spotted by our team before I was on the team in Tet 68. By the way, we were at a period that's called mini Tet, and for us it was every bit as big, less urban warfare, but every bit as big as Tet 68. So at any rate, as they departed the tree line, Luce called the artillery. In our case, we were close enough in. It was a four deuce mortar, 4.2 inch mortars, same size round as a 105 howitzer. And he started counting, and I heard him 20, 30, 40. He was up over 100. Pretty quick to hear another. It was probably a battalion-sized element. It was over 200, close to 300. What he did is he brought in what we call Victor Tango, variable time fuse, what people refer to as an air burst. Because you got an enemy out in the open, air burst explodes downward, all that shrapnel is being concentrated on him. So he hit their exit point. By then they were all out in the open. They had another 300 meters probably to get to the safety of the next village, where they would hold up during the daytime and then move again at night. Hit the tail end of the column with the first salvo, 6 rounds from the 4 deuce mortars. And then he started asking for traversing fire, because they're in the open on a pathway, no overhead cover, and he just started moving those rounds back and forth across them. And we did that. We did it so long that we took turns on the scope adjusting fire. By that time, we had 105s and we had 4 deuce mortar. Gunships came in and did their damage. Not the Cobra, the older gunships, but they were very effective. We were really good support. We chewed them up, and we were watching them outside of their vision. They knew we were there because they were getting fire adjusted, but they couldn't go, back where they came from. They couldn't get to where they were going to go, and so they were just being chopped up. It was war. They just got caught in a tough situation. They didn't expect Americans to be out there, and we've got really strong, powerful weaponry supporting us. So they did that for several hours. That started about probably 1 o'clock in the morning. So just before dawn, artillery said, "Look, we got to restock. You know, we're running out of ready ammo and whatnot. We're going to stop here for a second. Then we're going to come back in about 20 minutes. What we call a Tango Oscar Tango time on target." So they had brought in a couple more artillery batteries, and they would time the next volleys so all 20 or 30 rounds are converged on the same target at the same time. It looked like an old World War II movie. Well, meanwhile, if you give the North Vietnamese any time at all, they're moving their dead out of there. They're taking their wounded out of there. They're doing whatever they can. All of a sudden, they're moving, and unlike previously, they're not getting shot at by artillery. So they know something's changed. So he brought in the time on target, and that was it. The sun's starting to come up. You see, graying, and you can start to see the starlight scope. We don't need it anymore, and you can't use it in the daytime anyways. It'll damage it. So the division artillery that was supporting us, they sent out the armored cavalry, basically no more than a squad. It was 2 tanks and 4 or 5 armored cavalry vehicles, what we call APCs. But they're armed. They have 2 additional machine guns instead of just the 50. And they come out. They're going to sweep the battlefield. Well, we were the only infantry, and armored vehicles are vulnerable to RPGs and stuff, so they need the support. So we got up between them, 3 or 4 of us between each vehicle, and they went into the impact area online. At that point, there's enemy bodies, some weapons and stuff like that. They'd managed to get off a number of their casualties, probably during the course when it was dark enough and they weren't getting shot. We got past the impact when we started going into the wood lines where we figured they'd try to escape to. We found some more bodies. There was a hedgerow in there, and we had enemy. We figured their enemy. We could see them in the distance taking off. So our team jumped on the back of a tank, and we're going to go after them towards Village Von Me, which we thought had been their original destination. Jackie Leisure, the team leader of Wildcat 1, and the assistant team leader, Roger Anderson, and Chris Ferris, and Charlie Hartso. They were a 4-man team. We were 6. So Elsner, later would be my team leader, and he was carrying the M60 that day. He went to support them. They went into the hedgerow, saw some bodies, looked like wounded, and they were going to go in and see what documents, what intel they could find and stuff. Well, they got hit going in there. Jackie killed. Roger lost a thumb and a finger, and he got shot in the back. Fortunately, he had to. He got a couple of rounds were actually stopped by the magazines he had back there. He carried an M14E2. So we were out by that time, probably, I don't know, 500 or 600 meters out in the open rice paddy in the back of the tank. So we heard the shooting. We turned back around and joined up. By the time we got there, they were gone. They already had a dust off in. Jackie and Roger on the dust off. We didn't know what happened to Roger. We thought he got killed too. So what had been a very, for lack of a better term, successful mission turned tragic at the end. And I always felt that it was just a misuse of us. We shouldn't have been out there like a line of skirmishers, like we're at, Antietam or someplace. Had I been brigade commander for the day, I would have brought in them 1 or 2 infantry line battalions instead of having them out beating the brush. We had the enemy. They could have cordoned that area off and gone in and done the sweep of the battlefield. But I was just an old buck sergeant, a young buck sergeant at that time. And so it could have been handled better. But, you do lose people. You lose real good people, Jack's good. Good guy. So that was that fight, and we had many more, mostly smaller than that. Mostly was squad on squad size fights, us against other recon teams, or us being chased by bigger elements, and that's what we did. Go through a mission, come back, clean up, clean our weapons, clean our ammunition, and then get ready to ruck up again for the next mission.
I'm sorry, Dave. That's a tough one. That's a tough one.
Yeah, it didn't have to be that way, but like you say, hindsight is 20/20. I often was always suspicious whenever we got the level of our team leader. I always thought those guys were at least 2 or 3 years older than me because they seemed so much more mature, and they turned out they're the same age. It's just that you looked up to them. They were trusted by our commanding officer. You didn't have platoon leaders or senior NCOs in the field for the most part. There were some. Our first sergeant would go out with us. He'd say he wanted to know, are you knuckleheads paying attention to what I've been trying to train you on? Are you using good tactics? Are you using good noise discipline, fire discipline? But aside from that, pretty much the buck stopped with a staff sergeant.
So Dave, let's talk about June 18th, 1968, the mission where you guys were outnumbered over 20-1 by an overwhelming NVA force, and it ended with a Cobra gunship pilot, Larry Taylor, Mr. Ratliff, risking everything to get you guys out in what you called a certain death scenario, and you rode off into the sunset clinging to dear life on smoking hot rocket pods. Let's start at the top. What was the mission that night, Dave?
We were operating much further south than we normally did. Our base camp in Lai Cave was probably 60 kilometers to the north of where we would be operating. Normally, we would operate in free fire zone, usually jungle, very isolated from every place else. In this case, we would be much closer to civilians, the small villages. People, Saigon's a big city, but outside of the big cities, they're all hamlets and small villages. We were assigned to be what we call a rough puff. They're South Vietnamese soldiers, they're regional force, popular force. Lightly armed, they had a 60 millimeter mortar, probably 20 rounds of mortar bombs for it, maybe an equal amount of illumination rounds for that 60. And that was their heavy firepower. They were a platoon size element under a lieutenant. So that was our cantonment area, for lack of a better term. We stayed in there. Our FOB was operating out of there. And then we were given that area and pretty much at the discretion of our team leader. So we were 4 guys, and we had a young buck sergeant in charge of us. And within the general area, he would plan his own missions. So we would find out, what artillery there was to support us, what air, should we need it. And the FOB kept track of all that stuff. We would just relay our situation, and he would, round up whatever support we required. So we had been operating down there 4 or 5 years, 4 or 5 nights. They were short range patrols. We'd go out to maybe 3 or 4 clicks, which is a kilometer, and from our base. They were walkouts. We weren't inserted by helicopter because you couldn't do that clandestinely because it's all open rice paddy. Whether it's night or day, they're going to see you come in. So that mission started probably about 4:30 or 5 in the afternoon. And we were going to go south. We started off to the east because we didn't want people seeing us coming out of there knowing at least specifically where we were going. So we traveled east for a while, then headed south. and through a thin jungle area, no village. The village was over on the other side of the tree lines and stuff that we were moving through. Went to a wood line south of there and set up and waiting for full dark. We had a starlight scope, which gave us a great advantage. It was a full moon night. It was supposed to be, but there was some cloud cover, so we didn't have a whole lot of light, but we had enough as it turned out. I think it's about 1900. It was about 7:30 at night, full dark, and we proceeded to our Overwatch site where we was set. What we planned to do is, if we had an element that was standoff and we could hit it with artillery, and that's what we would do. If it was a small enough element and we could initiate contact in an ambush of our own, we would do that. Well, it turned out that night, I was on rear security. Ellsworth took off. He walked his own point. His radio man was right behind him, and then Billy Conn was our grenadier. That was our order of march. So we started moving towards our site. We had probably left the wood line behind us about 150, maybe 200 meters, and Conn stopped. So I stopped. I could see enough to see that he wasn't moving. I could see a little bit of movement up front of me, and they would pass it along, and Conn cups his hand in my ear and said, "Gooks all around." What had happened, we were sneaky enough to get into the situation, but it turned out we weren't sneaky enough to get out of it. So we kind of walked in an open end of a horseshoe formation of enemy. They're probably in transit. They were aligned around the rice paddy. It's sitting on dikes, maybe the size of a football field. So I was turned around by Conn and he said, "You're on point now. Let's get back to that wood line." I had probably moved a dozen paces. All of a sudden, he tapped me on the shoulder, whispered again. They moved a couple squads in behind us. We're cut off. So now we can't run. We didn't know how long we could hide. We were going to have to make our stand.
So, Dave, your Lrrp team has unknowingly stuck into the perimeter of a huge NVA force, waiting for transit, and unbeknownst to you and your team, the true size of that opposing force, it's an overwhelming force, and you guys absolutely can't take these guys. There's nothing you can do about that. So you guys say, hey, we have to back out. We need to reassess the situation and this enemy element. And you make it only a dozen or so paces before you realize you've been cut off. Dave, what's going through your mind at that point?
Tension. This is this is no game. We're in deep kimchi here, and but you train for it, you accept it, and you're determined to get out of it. Myself, I said about a nanosecond worth of prayer, and then you get on with it. Fortunately for us, we were stopped. Our path was right past. We're trying to get to the wood line. Can't make it now because we're cut off. But we were at a confluence of water buffalo pass, and they water buffalo cart pass. They use these carts pulled by water buffaloes out into the paddies for planting and harvesting their rice. This one was about 5 feet wide, 5 or 6 feet at the top, the base 7 or 8 feet, and it's made out of laterite clay. And that gets water soaked, and it gets sun baked. It's like cement. So we climbed over the top of that onto the other side. That becomes our parapet. So can't get out, we need help. Help would be, as it turned out, in the form of brand new in the inventory for the division, AH-1G Cobra gunships. And it was, what was scrambled was D Troop Air, which was Captain Taylor's unit. At that time, he was lieutenant, but he was also, for that night, he was a wing leader of a 2-ship element. I had seen Cobras, but I'd never had them directly support us. We generally had the older type we call the Bravo model Huey, which had been, retrofitted to be a gunship. And they were very effective. And they had 2 door gunners that, they could get on very quickly. Pretty much after the first tracer round, they were on target at 100 miles an hour, shooting on the ground below them. So they were very versatile. But the Cobra was a whole different element. That night, he had on each side of his ship, his Cobra gunship, two 19-round rocket pods, rocket delivery systems, called M200. And in there he had 19 2.75-inch folding fin rockets. In addition, his front seater, his co-pilot, Taylor was the aircraft commander. He's also the wing leader. He had a wingman, Captain Roger Trickler, and his co-pilot was Captain Richard LeMay. In Larry's ship, his co-pilot was a pretty brand new ward officer. He was 001 at that time, Sgt Ratliff. And J.O. said flying with Larry was, it was a dream. It was like you're flying with the ace. And he was calm and cool. I had talked briefly before I handed the radio off to Elsner with him. Taylor, best way I could describe it, he sounded like a tour bus driver in Beverly Hills, California, pointing out Lucille Ball's home. And they knew, and that's generally the way they talk, but he was particularly cool, that if they're calm and they're organized, it runs down the radio line to us. And so he sounded like he was out for a Sunday flight. But at any rate, he homed in, he found our position. When they get scrambled, they got 2 or 3 minutes to get into their aircraft, crank it up, go, and they're on the mission.
So what actually kicked off that firefight that night? Who took the first shots?
Well, we called our radio man, Gerald Patty. He called our FOB. Elsner picked up the mic on the horn and said, "Get us some help. We're in trouble out here. We need artillery. Probably going to need some illumination at some point, and we need air. See what you can get, whether it's fixed wing or gunship." And we really didn't use fixed wing that much because they had their ordnance is big, it's deadly, and they can't get as close to us as we need. So they called Fuloy, Dark Horse 3, Dark Horse Zulu is the headquarters up there, and Dark Horse the call sign for their aviators. They got scouts, they got what we call slicks, transport helicopters. Most concerned to us, though, of course, was the gunships. And so called in and said they're on their way, gave us an ETA, and we were, kind of nervous, waiting for help. At any rate, when he arrived, he needed to pinpoint exactly where we were because we would soon be receiving machine gun fire, minigun fire from the gunships within 12 to 15 meters of our position. That's how close we needed to get that coverage. At any rate, Dark Horse 3-2, which is then Lieutenant Larry Taylor, he said, I'm going to need you. Elsner said, you know where we are? I said, generally, I know you're off the end of the village Apco Kong. I said, but that didn't really help. It's dark as an inkwell down there from my view. And you're going to have to mark your position. So, okay, we need help. We're going to have to, we don't want to, but so we knew what was going to happen when we did that. Each of us had a star cluster flare, and it's a marking rather than a parachute type illumination flare. So he said, when we're going to head back to the north and come by on either side of your team once we know exactly where you are. So when I give you the go, shoot off your marker round, your flares. So he said, we took the caps on. Looks like it's a roadside emergency fusee. Got them ready to go, and he said, go. And we all simultaneously shot one of those straight up in the air, marking our position. We didn't want to go right, left, or out. Wanted to know exactly we were underneath that. Said, gotcha. Said, get low. we're as low as we can get. If I could bury myself in this rice paddy, I would. This is what I'm thinking to myself. That's not, repartee is not going on at the time. Anyway, they start, and they got, immediately we did that, all hell broke loose. Muzzle flashes from the area surrounding us, most of it to the east and north of our position, but we were getting fire from all directions.
How close were they?
They're anywhere from initially anywhere from 50 or 60 yards, and then they're on beyond it, including we started getting fire from the tree line we come from, which is about 200 meters to the south of us. So we were popping up and down, shooting. We had plenty of targets and muzzle flashes. The best way I could describe it was a game like whack-a-mole, and we were the dummy that somebody's trying to whack a hammer on. So you just hope when you popped up and fired, you hit something, because you're basically firing at their muzzle flashes, and they're doing the same with you. But while that's going on, our firepower really was of lesser importance than what Taylor was laying down. Taylor and his wingman, Captain Trickler, between the two of them, was carrying a total of 152 air-to-ground rockets. Each ship was carrying 8,000 rounds for their miniguns, which could fire up to 3,000 rounds per minute if they chose to fire at that, which they didn't. They knew they were going to have to husband their ammunition, their ordnance. So that went on for probably a half hour at the most. And at what Taylor had expected to happen, and what would normally happen, he would get relief in the form of another flight of gunships. It might be Cobras, and more likely the old Bravo type gunships. At any rate, once that happened, he could go rearm and refuel at the nearest base, which for him at that point would have been either Benoit Air Force Base across the Dong Nai River. We were about 2 kilometers west of the Dong Nai, and he could refuel at the same time. So by this point in the fight, we are finally down, each of us riflemen, down our final magazine. We'd all expended over 600 rounds through our rifles. Our grenadier, Billy Kahn, had been carrying 60 rounds. He carried 18 on a load-bearing vest, but he also carried a empty claymore bag strapped over each shoulder with additional rounds, total of 60. Each of us carried another 5 rounds for him, because he was our artillery, in effect, our indirect fire. So he's out. His backup weapon is a 1911 service pistol. That's all he's got left, and he's already gone through 1 magazine of those. He had another magazine left. At this point, Taylor and Trickler, the pilots, had expended all their ammunition. What Taylor then decided, by that time he knew that he wasn't getting the gunships because they were committed elsewhere or too far away to be of any use to us. He wasn't going to get what we call a Slick, a Huey transport helicopter, because the one that was supposed to be there had run into total communication failures, which of course was not known till he was back on the ground in Phu Loy, that he was out of the fight. So they couldn't even scramble a replacement aircraft. And at that point in the fight, probably had been taking too long to get there at any rate. Plus, would have made a nice fat target as they're trying to sit down to pick our team up, if we could get out of our encirclement. Taylor came up with a plan. He decided that he and his wingman were running low on fuel, didn't have much left. Shortly thereafter, their 20-minute fuel light came on. His plan was he's going to come in and get us. Folks back in the rear with the gear, as we said. Some bird colonel, who probably is not a troop commander, decided, no, you can't do that. He said, those guys, they're trained to escape and evade, and they're committed to escape in. Taylor, you don't understand, there's no place to escape and evade to, where they had done so already. And So he said, I'm going to pick them up, and please stay off my radio, because they were on our FM channel that we depended on for talking with Taylor. Our team leader and Taylor were constantly talking, and they kept talking and drowning us out. So
Taylor absolutely defied a direct order saying, no, you're not going to do that. You're not going to sit down and pick them up.
he ignored it.
Yeah.
And then he lost communications because he switched channels, and they didn't know what alternate frequency we were on with him. Yeah, he knew it was wrong. It made no sense. I mean, we know pilots shot down in Laos, North Vietnam. Additional pilots and aircraft are lost trying to rescue that single pilot. Somebody got their backup, said, no, that's a gunship. It's not a utility. There's no place for those guys to ride. Can't be done. Taylor said, I'm going to try. I got 4 Americans in trouble. And thinking was going on in his mind. And he figured if he landed, if he gets out of the encirclement, he could land, we'd figure it out. You know, we were Lrrps, Rangers. We're supposed to be resourceful, and we were pretty desperate. At any rate, the plan was he told his wingman, use your last rounds. He had about a couple hundred rounds left for his miniguns. Hit the east side of the encirclement there, and then head on back to Phu Loy to refuel and rearm. Come back if I tell you to, but I want to make sure you don't get you don't crash because you're out of fuel as well. And he told us that this is going on, much of it between them, but he did tell us that I'm going to make a gun run to the west, which was toward the village, which is about 200 meters from us. And he had no ammunition. We didn't know it. And we see flashes. Well, it turns out those are his landing lights. He was just flicking them on and off, drawing attention away from us. And then we didn't see anything else. But he had told my team leader, when I make my run to the west, you got any claymores left? And Al said, yeah, we got 4. He said, put two to the northeast and 2 to the southeast. When I make my run, blow your claymores, run like hell out in the middle of the rice paddy, about 100 meters or so, get you through the encirclement, exactly on an azimuth of 135. He kept the river was exactly east of us, but he kept it simple, so he kind of just calculate an angle, which in this case to the southeast. So we blew the claymores after he made his run, took off. I was rear security, so my job as best I can is to slow pursuers down if I can't stop them outright. I had a half dozen grenades left that I'd brought with me. So I let everybody get out of the bursting radius of those grenades, and I then flung a grenade right and left, ran on about 20, 30 meters, threw another 2 grenades, and then about 10 more meters I threw my last two grenades. So at that point, the old saying, don't go to a gunfight with a knife, we were in that situation. They had the guns, and all we had was our knives. We get out there, Taylor, we feel a downdraft, and he lands somehow within about 10 meters of us. Elzer said, we ran over to the ship, and Elzer said, get on. And I said, what do you mean, get on? Get on where? And he said, anywhere you can, just grab on.
So Taylor and Ratliff hit the ground. You guys had left the safety of your cover and concealment you'd used that entire night. You arrived at the Cobra gunship, and you're in the open, essentially easy pickings for enemy soldiers, and he just says, get on?
Right. So Elzer and Patty, the radio man, went around the other side and sat on the skid, straddling like a fence or a horse, holding on to the struts, which connects it to the fuselage. Con and I left our own devices. We looked at the rocket pods, and they jutted out in front of the spawn, called a weapon spawn. So it looks like a small wing. We jumped on the rocket pods. Turns out with a 19-round delivery systems, there was not a big enough gap between the two of them for our inside, my left leg, his right leg. So we gripped real tight with our right leg, and we kind of scrunched together, and then we threw our hands over the back of the little wing, and Taylor tapped on the side of the pounded on the side of the fuselage. Ellsworth did the same thing on the other side, and Taylor knew we were there. Time to get the hell out of Dodge. Took up, went straight up. He said 1,500 meters, get out of small arms range. Then he gradually settled back down and started flying nap of the earth on the river, Dongai River, which is about 2 kilometers to our to our west, and to our east. At any rate, he took us down to, there was an American big major base called Tonsanute Air Force Base. They have a water treatment plant, and one of his ground troops, our Grand Cavalry troops, was settled in there for the night for security. So he took us in there, landed. He put on his landing lights, had never been in there before, and did a 180. We got off, ran around the front of his ship, and all we could think to do is almost ingrained in us, and we just popped him a quick salute, gave him a thumbs up. I mean, thank you, great job. He's gone, and I didn't see him again until 1999.
So let me get this straight for the viewers here and just kind of paint a picture. Grossly outnumbered and facing certain death, this God-sent angel in the form of a Cobra gunship piloted by Taylor and Ratliff extract you guys from a hot LZ, and you rode out of a firefight, bullets whizzing by, clinging to dear life onto rocket pods. You can't even make this stuff up. It's so unreal. I don't even think Hollywood could put this in a movie because it's just such an insane and unreal event of just heroism. Now, you had mentioned before Taylor was doing all of this under the direct orders to not fly this mission, do not stay around any longer than bingo fuel, and under no circumstances whatsoever, he was ordered, do not set that Cobra gunship on the ground in the middle of a massive firefight to extract this 4-man LRRP team. But being the hero he was, he defied those orders and did it anyways?
Yeah, we didn't even know that he was doing it basically against orders, because it was the right thing to do, because he was the officer, literally the senior commander on the spot, and he said, it's my call, my risk. Of course, it was his co-pilot's risk too. But he said, I got 4 Americans in trouble. I think I can help them. I don't know that I can because it's never been done before. It was only done once or twice subsequently, and those were pilots that knew where they could ride. All we had was what we had, and we were glad that it was there. So it was a rush, for lack of a better term. I mean, wiping our brow if we could have left our grip off, because we're out of that scenario. And once we got on the ground, we lit up a cigarette, as we did back in those days. And ended up back in the transient barracks. They put us up over the night because we had to go back out the next morning to the same place, but this time with a platoon of heavily armed infantry, what we called Aero Rifle Platoon, LRRPs. So that was it. We sat up till the adrenaline cranked down enough for us to get a little sleep, and never saw Taylor until a reunion of our unit about 30 years later. So, and the war went on. I had about a little over a month left in country at that time, and so I ran another 3 missions, 2 of which were dry holes, no contact at all. One we had, contact, but not like that night. And Larry Taylor left country in August, about a month after I did. He probably flew another 20, 30, 40 missions, who knows, because he would get called out multiple times during a given day, being a gunship. The transport helicopters generally didn't operate at night. The gunship operated 24/7. So that was it. I didn't see him again till 30 years later.
Dave, it just sounds, it's crazy. Dave, at any point in this firefight, did you ever just feel man, this is the one. This is where it ends for me.
No, you never give up. Taylor wasn't going to give up on us, and we weren't going to give up, period. I mean, we wanted to stay alive, obviously, and it wasn't a matter of victory. Taylor basically concluded, well, obviously, we're not going to prevail by force of arms. I got to get us, and I got to get them out of here, and I'm not leaving without them. So I'm talking about 6 guys, not just myself and my co-pilot. And I can't get into his head, but the results show that he really didn't care. He told me afterwards, we got shot down. I had my J-frame Smith and Wesson, which we carried in the shoulder holes because there wasn't room in the cockpit for anything bigger than that. And it wasn't a matter of getting to friendly territory. As far as if he'd only got us, 1 or 2 kilometers away from that area, that would have been fine. But it was almost like the brass expected us to E&E towards the Dong Nai River. I guess then we were supposed to just, the flow was towards Saigon. I guess they expected us just to dog paddle down the Dong Nai River.
Hold your breath and slow
down. Yeah, I don't know what their master plan was. We weren't thinking long term. He got us out of there. We were safe for that night. The war went on. The missions continued, and that's how we ended the year for me.
Absolutely unreal. Just business as usual. Now, your op tempo back then, it was pretty high. When was your next op? Did you guys at least get like a few days off after that?
We got our warning order 2 days after that. We were back on another mission a day after that.
Just 3 days after, you're back in the field in action.
Yeah, the war went on. Taylor was back in the air. So they might have been irritated with him, but they liked to having his firepower working.
You're a humble man, Dave. You truly are. With a story like that, you shouldn't have to pay for a beer in 100 lifetimes, but you rarely speak about it. And it's always when you do speak about it, it's Taylor's heroism and it's Ratliff's heroism saving you guys, and not what you did on the ground and putting yourself at risk to help ensure the safety of your teammates. So humble, in fact, that you haven't even brought up the fact that you were awarded a Silver Star that long night in Vietnam for your actions. I can see you blushing now, but tell me, what was your Silver Star awarded for exactly?
Well, I think the action in general, it was basically, though, probably more primarily because I was a rear guard. I had to cover our back trail. Now, the guy in Ellsworth he's the one that was running as point. He could have run into anything. Same with Patty and same with Con, but none of whom at that point had any ammunition left at all. So he's charging out into the night. I stayed behind. I was just doing my job, and that probably doing my job.
So how long was it after that firefight did you learn you were getting the Silver Star?
They had actually drafted it, our CO in the Lrrp company, Captain Price, before I left country. By that time, I was down to probably about 10 days in a stand down. And so I saw a draft of it. I didn't think anything of it. I got it, I think I reported into Fort Hood, Texas, 1st Armored Division. And I received it, I think, that would have been August, probably November, December. And I just got a call to the CO, said, got a company formation, got awards and decorations. I was a squad leader in the 4 Deuce Mortar Platoon, and they were forward observer primarily. I said, okay. And he said, I'm thinking, what's this got to do with me? He said, you get an award. I said, what for? At any rate, he said, he told me all I needed to know. That was the Army. You'd be in formation, don't worry about it. But it was a nice, it was a full 1st Armored Division reviewing stand, nice big sheet cake cutting with a officer's sword, and I got a picture of that. It was interesting.
That's hilarious. So, being extracted out of a hot LZ was nothing new in Vietnam, but being extracted out of a hot LZ, clinging to a Cobra gunship rocket pod, that was.
It was definitely a one-time thing for me too.
Yeah, that's a good thing. Did people talk about that in Vietnam? You know how stories kind of get, blown up and telephone line. Did people talk about it?
Well, yeah. And I suspect that's why there are no recriminations. Both when Larry got back to his base the next day, and we got back to our base in Lake, we had the Army Public Information Officers, Stars and Stripes Pacific, AP, UPI, and Reuters. Probably not reported. I think what they call stringers, the guys that did the field work for the journalists, interviewed us, and it was in Stars and Stripes, in the Division newspaper. It was in McClatchy, which is my home area in California. I think it was the Fresno Bee and all this other stuff. But fortunately, it came out on my local radio station before I got home, and one of my friend's mothers heard about it. So she told my mom about it. I said, "Don't worry, he's okay. No problem." And at any rate, it was interesting, but it was a kind of a flash in the pan. And then, of course, the war went on, life went on, and it came out in some books and stuff like that, at a later point. And that's it.
Talk of the country for a little bit.
You're a legend in our own mind, as Dirty Harry would say.
A legend in all our minds, I'd say. But you mentioned to me earlier that Taylor and Ratliff, the two pilots that saved you and your team, did they get any recognition like you and your LRRP team did?
No, they didn't. They were initially both recommended at troop level. Their capacity, my understanding, for their awards and decorations within the troop level, which essentially is a company-sized unit, is up to the Distinguished Flying Cross, which is equivalent to the Bronze Star. It's the fourth highest Valor Award. They went forward. All of them went forward as DFCs. Captain Taylors, Captain Tricklers, and Captain LeMays were upgraded further up the chain of command to Silver Star. Elzer, myself, Silver Stars, and Patty and Con received Bronze Stars with V device. So that's what Larry Taylor got initially, Silver Star.
Tell me about what you guys did, because when you finally linked back up with him and you retold the stories, what made you decide that this isn't enough for these guys? What made you decide that I'm going to make this right?
Well, when we actually met in Branson, Larry came to our Ranger reunion. First time I met either of my team leaders since the war, and certainly, and the first time I ever met Larry at all. We knew by that time, what awards we'd gotten. Didn't know anything what to do about it, though. I wasn't an attorney, and certainly not an expert on military regulations or particularly awards and decorations requirements. But over time, over the years, and eventually, that was the last I saw my team leader. Last I saw Bill Kahn was killed, along with his entire team, all 6 guys and the 2 pilots and 2 crewmen that tried to extract him, emergency extraction, hit by an RPG coming out of the pickup zone, crashed, and they were all gone. Gerald Patty died of cancer in 2015. Elder died of cancer in 2010. So by this time, it's just me. I'm the only survivor, LRRP Ranger, that had been on the ground. Richard LeMay, Captain LeMay, he was shot down in September of '68, so he was gone. Didn't know anything about what happened to Captain Trickler. I think he was a career officer. At any rate, really didn't know what to make of. What I knew was that whatever we did was here, and Taylor was up here. Totally, just a matter of scale as far as I was concerned. But I kept hearing about it, as we all have, of World War II fellows getting upgraded to the Medal of Honor, whatever they got. Maybe they got nothing, or maybe they got a Silver or Bronze Star or a Distinguished Service Cross. Korean War, Vietnam War, you're seeing more and more of that. Now, by that time, I had been, my career primary as a logistics director down in Silicon Valley. And I worked with regulators. So I knew there was a process. I didn't know much about that process. All I could think, one thing that seemed to be tied to it, you start the ball rolling with Congress. Well, what I found out later on, you have to. You can't have an award upgraded when it's beyond, or awarded when it's 3 years beyond the incident. So that had all lapsed in 1971. So Senator Bob Corker was senator from Tennessee. Larry's a native of Chattanooga, Tennessee. So I sent a letter. I said, you got a native son there named Larry Taylor, lives up on Signal Mountain, up above Chattanooga. And here's what he did, and here's what he got. Here's what I think he deserves, the Medal of Honor.
Internal.
Yeah, sent a letter to Bob Corker. Didn't know anything about the process, but I knew it needed to start with his congressional representation. Instead of talking to his congressman, I said, well, usually the senior guy in the state is one of the two senators. Went to Corker, good guy. He immediately assigned a lady named Stacy Willoughby. She was his constituent's assistant, legislative aide. She also did not know much about the process. So she found the regulations, she directed me to it on the internet. We boned up on it. Okay, here's where we need this, we need this, we need this, and all the various documents, the witness letters, a map of the battle area, which, we were able to find on the internet as well. Basically, everything about it, we had to do a justification. Well, why should this be upgraded from a Silver Star, skipping over the Distinguished Service Cross, which is #2 award, and right on up to the Medal of Honor. And anybody that had even read about the story was shocked that he didn't get the Medal of Honor initially. So, at any rate, at this point, it's just our opinion, and we got the burden's on us. We're the one that has to carry it. So we started the process. Got all the witness letters. I was working with folks, Carl Poston, a friend of mine down in Chattanooga, good mutual friend of both Larry and I eventually, but he known Larry since they were high school kids. And so Stacy and I did all we could, but after we got the first reject letters, I'll call it, from the Department of the Army Awards Decoration Branch in Fort Knox, Kentucky, we knew there was more stuff required, and it was more than just the two of us could do. Because literally, I was retired by then, but she still had her day job, and we needed more expertise, and we needed more firepower, if you will.
And this is when you met Dennis.
That was at the actual award ceremony. So this was 6 years later.
Okay.
Yeah. So we formed a task force in Chattanooga. Major General Bill Raines, retired 2-star general, and he was the head director and chairman of the board of a group called National Medal of Honor Heritage Society, that later became, when they built their center, the National Medal of Honor Heritage Center in Chattanooga. And the center is dedicated to the Medal of Honor, because the first place it was ever awarded was for battle in Chattanooga, so-called Andrews Raiders, a great locomotive chase, Union soldiers, 1862. So the whole institute and center, if you will, is dedicated to the Medal of Honor. At any rate, we met. I fly out from Nevada, and we meet in Chattanooga. General Raines gives us his office, his phones, his copiers, whatever we needed. And we were just going back and forth. It was frustrating because we'd answer a question, and we get a request back, and it'd take 6-7 months to get the request even. And the nature of the question told me that they had not even read my previous submission, because I'd already covered that in great detail. So it was obvious that the going in position from their side is no, 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 no. I don't care how many times you come back, no. Well, we kept going back. And eventually we got down to the point where Fort Knox, which is the Human Resource Command, they turned it down. So this is not going to happen. We're not even going to recommend Distinguished Service Cross in lieu of the Medal of Honor. However, they believe it should happen, but they were bound by regulations to make sure we met every single criteria and answered every question. And the key question that number one, they don't like to second guess commanders, particularly those that were commanding troops 55 years previously, or 50 years at that point. At any rate, they said, we can't move because of this one hangup. However, we recommend that you go to the Army Board for the Correction of Military Records. It's kind of like going to appeals court when you lost at lower court, at least in that hierarchy. At any rate, submitted there again, and oh gosh, that was probably a year in that first process. Came back, rejected. Same issues. What did the commanders, Larry Taylor's commander, know at the time they made an award decision? So in other words, what was not known that they could have used to upgrade from Larry's Silver Star up to the Medal of Honor? Finally, we got the rejection back from the Army Board for the Correction of Military Records. General B.B. Bell and I sat down, and he was the chairman, by that time, the chairman of the Medal of Honor Heritage Center in Chattanooga. He was Norman Schwarzkopf's number 2 executive officer. What we did at that point is look it over very carefully. He just inquired to me, he said, how do we answer this one question? We've got everything else. We got everything else nailed down. We got this one roadblock. And he said, this narrative here, which is part of the packet, where'd that come from? And he said, it came from a book called Phantom Warriors by Gary Linder, who'd been 101st LRRP, same time we were there. He said, he looked at it, this is copyright 1999. I said, yeah, that's when the book came out. He said, so obviously Larry's commanders had no access to this. He said, didn't they talk to you guys? I said, no, they never talked to me, my teammates, a team leader, our company commander. The fight was done and everybody moved on. And awards and decorations at the troop level, normally they don't go that far, because those guys they're pilots also. They've also got flying duties. So it's up to division. Well, Captain Taylor's troop commander was killed in midair just 2 weeks after this gunfight. Division Commander Keith Ware, himself a Medal of Honor recipient for World War II, was killed when his aircraft was shot down in September '68. So there was nobody to push it at that time. There was nobody to get out in the field and talk to us and interview us. And there was no inclination, because everybody had their duties to do in the battles that came subsequent to that. And and in the bureaucracy, that pile in the inbox is not going to get any smaller. It's going to keep building up, no matter how many times you move it to the other side of the desk. So there was no motivation to do that. However, when General Bell saw the date, in fact, they had no access to it, had not talked to any of us, he said, "What's that sound to you like?" New and substantive information not known to Captain Taylor's commanders at the time they had to make an award decision.
And that was the key.
That was the key. So we filed what we called a request for reconsideration, and that's kind of the last gasp. If you don't do that, you're done. We prevailed. About 6 months, 7 months later, we got a letter back, sending it back to Awards and Decorations, Human Resource Command, recommend approval, and then they start the process, and it goes from there to the Pentagon, G1, and finally, ultimately, there's only one authority that can award Medal of Honor, and that's the President. So finally, went through all that process, and Larry received a phone call in July. His wife woke him up, and she said, "You got a call from the President." He said, "President of what?" And Larry had always been this, yeah, if you listen to him tell the incident, "Oh, I just happened to be flying in the area that night, so I thought maybe I could lend a hand." You know, that's very aw shucks about it. At any rate, he was pleased and proud to get it when he got it, but he was never counting on it, never sought it. So it was up to us to make sure that we got it done on his behalf. And also because it was the right thing to do. For me, that 6 years was like having a new mission. I was retired, and I had the time to do it. I'd always been a pretty good writer and done quite extensively throughout my career. So I could supply all the material. That one stumbling block, once we got past it, got awarded. So September 5th, 2023, White House ceremony. Captain Taylor gets his Medal of Honor awarded by President Joe Biden. Next day, he was inducted in the Hall of Heroes, the Pentagon, which temporarily was at Fort Myers because of COVID. So that was it. We finally got it. He got some adulation. He was Grand Marshal of Parade in Chattanooga, his hometown, which is a very martial and a very pro-military community. They really celebrate it. Unfortunately, he was still sick. He'd been suffering from cancer for almost 10 years at that point, and getting gradually weaker. So I sat down with him. And I said, we need to do something with Sgt Ratliff. He said, you know what he got? Any awards for that night? He said, "I think he got a Distinguished Flying Cross." I said, "Really? That's all? That's all?" He said, "Yeah, that's all I know about, and I haven't been in contact with him for 40 or 45 years." So I said, "Well, I think we need to do something, and now that you got the Medal of Honor, historically, I don't know if this is true, but this is what I've been told, both the Army, the Air Force, Marines, Navy, if you got a two-pilot aircraft, generally the aircraft commander, whatever award he gets, his co-pilot is one level lower. Could be the same, but it's at least one level lower." So I said, "We need to get J.O. a Distinguished Service Cross." And he said, "I agree." He said, "What do you need?" I said, "Well, I need a witness letter." When in this office, he pointed his computer, said, "Take a letter." So he dictated it to me. We wordsmithed it. So now we got a letter from a Medal of Honor recipient, Captain Taylor. I did my own letter, and then I went to other pilots and got them letters. I said, "Here's the situation. You all know, the mission. You weren't on it, but you listened to it in the Tactical Operations Center. You, both Larry and J.O. Ratliff, who eventually became his own aircraft commander, finished out his tour. So we want to get him a Distinguished Service Cross. Silver Star probably is more doable, but that's not it. It's no more than Larry and I getting the Medal of Honor." So we filed those documents. They're in Fort Knox, the Human Resources Command, specifically the Awards and Decorations branch. and is progressing, working directly with people in there. Totally different situation than we have with Larry Taylor. Now it's not no, it's just, okay, you submitted this, now we need something else. Very clear, concise, I know what I need to do, I submit it, and the process is ongoing. And we hope to succeed on that, in not too distant future. I would hope at least by early next year, if not sooner, but that's my best guess. Not so much my own witness letter, but because his key document is a Medal of Honor recipient that's supporting him, that sat 3 feet from him during that fight. He was the only other pilot beside Larry Taylor that came in on the ground. The others did great. They were great aviators, did a great job, and we appreciate it. But he was on the ground with Larry. He was in the fight with Larry the whole way. And as Larry pointed out, you're more likely to get shot than me because you're sitting in front of me. So, at any rate, it was one of Larry's final wishes that we get that thing done. And that's where we stand. Hopefully we learn something. I'm slow at times, but I do learn eventually.
Dave, you have a truly incredible story. I'm so glad you were able to make it out here into my home, and it's been an honor to have you here. For the viewers, if you could tell us, from the small farm town in which you grew up in to the jungles of Vietnam and now here today, what has this whole life meant to you?
Well, obviously Larry Taylor made it possible. Made it possible to have a wife, son, now grandson, to enjoy things that many guys never got a chance to. And I grew up. I mean, you and I were talking earlier. My first year out of high school was a disaster, but I ended up eventually, succeeding. It was just a matter of maturity, which my wife says I'm still working on. But yeah, it's been a good life, and hopefully there's quite a bit of it left. But we had a saying in the Army. If you're in combat, if you're lucky, you get shot at and missed. But in the Army, you're always going to get shit at and hit. So, but I got no gripes. I'm here, intact, at least physically. And it's been good.
So ladies and gentlemen, I appreciate you guys tuning in here today. I appreciate you guys watching this, liking, subscribing, and sharing Mr. Hill's story. It's heroes like him, that true stories of just absolute heroism and complete disregard for their own safety and sacrificing themselves for the safety of others. It's stories like that I want to cement in history. And our goal here is to preserve Mr. Hill's story and so many warriors like him from so many years ago. Fortunately, every day we lose a veteran, whether it's from Vietnam, Korea, World War II, or even the global war on terror. Every day we lose somebody. And with that person that we lose that story. And I want to preserve in history